Welcome to the Awaken Man podcast. And on today's conversation, we have Christy Tate. How are we doing?
Hi, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
For those of you who don't know, Christy wrote the book, the New York Times best-selling book. Actually, that's like in itself, what an accolade. That is and the reason it is a New York Times best-selling book is when you pick this book up, especially if you are someone who's made a commitment to change your mental, emotional, spiritual well-being, and you're looking for a group, you must read this book. I was just speaking to Christy off camera. Then we give Christy's book to, and we recommend it to all of our students on our courses, our certifications, and our groups to understand the power of what a group can do in your work, in your life, in your relationships. It's an absolute life-changing book. And I was saying to Christy, I'm like a proper, I'm like a when I read books, I have like five on the go at once. I never binge one book. And Christy's book, I just listened to from cover to cover. I was like literally, I listened to it. I didn't. You read it as well, though, didn't you?
I did. I did. That's
Yeah,
a lot of hours with my voice.
yeah. It was. It was just like one weekend. I was like, didn't put it down, and I think the reason it resonated with me personally so much was how transformative that process was for you. Like I was just like enamored because in all the means and terms you were successful. You're a successful woman, and it was for the first time for me as a guy as well. Listening to you, it was like you were sharing what was behind the curtain of what is often a shrouded experience for so many people. And I was like, this is amazing. So this is why I just told all my clients to read it, and I got the same feedback, from guys, especially guys. It was really good because I was like saying, hey, listen to this, and they couldn't put it down either. Like, this was amazing. So yeah, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm really, really grateful for you being here.
Thank you. I had no idea when I wrote this book about, who I was and what group therapy did for me. I never dreamed I'd be on a podcast with someone in Dubai. So this is a huge honor. People have limited time, limited resources that readers would pick up my book and recommend it. It's like I never take for granted that privilege.
Yeah, yeah, and do you know what? It's that ripple effect. You don't really. Sometimes you'll never even know who that touches and how it makes them change. Um, one guy, I gave it to him, and I just never in a million years thought he would get, because sometimes as I'm a coach, I give my clients a book and say, hey, read that. I think it'll be valuable for you. Or I'll send them a link and say, buy that, because I know when people buy books, they normally read them.
Yeah,
And
right.
yeah, and couple of weeks later, he was like, "Oh, by the way, that book, game changing." And it was just like, and I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" He was like, "Well, I get it. I get it. I get why being in a group is so powerful." So, can we just, because I know not everyone listening to the podcast would have read your book,
Yeah.
can you just give us a kind of a highlight experience that of the experience itself and then writing the book?
Sure. So, what happened in my life was I had always been a high achiever and I paid quiet, private consequence for that. I had disordered eating. Then I got into recovery in a 12-step kind of homegrown. The bulimia was sort of under control, but I was still pretty addicted to achievement and perfection. And I got all the way to law school and I found out that I was first in my class after the first year. And I was euphoric. It's a wonderful achievement. I knew that doors were going to fly open for me professionally, but that lasted honestly less than a minute because I knew deep down inside that I could ace a test. I could go out in the professional world and kick ass, but I had no idea how to have any kind of intimate relationship. And I'm talking friendship. I was not very close to my family. I longed so deeply for connection. I certainly wanted a boyfriend, but I also wanted friends. Like I would watch other people and they would have close friends, long-term friends. I didn't have any of that, but I had an awesome transcript and had a great resume, and that was it. And I wanted more, and I had no idea what to do. I was a smart girl, but my smarts weren't going to fix it. What was wrong with me was like my soul, my emotions, my ways of being. That's not something I knew how to fix by myself. And I do believe it can't be. So a friend of mine recommended her therapist, and he did only groups. And I was terrified. I don't want to go tell my secrets. I had secrets. I had secrets about food and sex and money. I mean, it turns out they weren't that exciting, but once you have a secret, it's moldy and it feels bigger than life. And I didn't want to tell a bunch of strangers that. And my plan was, because it was a group, it's cheaper. And I didn't have money to go see a private therapist, super expensive in the States. And so I thought, I will see this guy for 2 years. And then when I'm a lawyer and I'm making the big bucks, I'll go get a real therapist, which I put in quotes. And so this was all in 2003. I started group with this wacky therapist who really, really believes that any problem a person can have interpersonally, social, emotional, can be solved with group work, which I didn't believe that. I thought he was crazy. But I tried it, and and I'm still there. So now it's been 22 years, 20, whatever, 20 years. I have been with him. I still go. It absolutely changed my life. What I wanted readers to know was two things. One, you can absolutely change your life, not by yourself, but you can change your life. That was number one. And number two, it is not easy and it is not quick. I thought that was something it's not 28 days. I went in there and I told Dr. Rosen, who's the therapist I've in the book and that I still see, I said, I want a boyfriend who has good hygiene. And if you can't get me into an intimate relationship within 5 years, I'm going to kill myself. I'm sort of dramatic, but I also meant it. And he said, okay, well, what else do you want? What else do you want? And it took longer than 5 years. I had really deeply entrenched habits of mind and defenses built up around myself. And it took, I mean, at the 5 year mark, I was like, well, I didn't want to kill myself anymore. I had learned how to have relationships in the group and with Dr. Rosen. And it was a laboratory I went to every week to build the skills. Like you go to the gym. And I had never heard a group. I wrote the book for anybody out there who's awesome on paper, got a great life on paper, wonderful earning potential. But, and this is a big but, there's the interpersonal anxiety, angst, loneliness, and they don't know how to fix it. That's the person. This is the love letter to that person. The book I wrote the book that I wanted to see when I was that young woman.
Wow. Yeah. And well, you definitely achieved that because and I think it actually, for me, it expands way beyond just that person who was majorly, we'll say like struggling. Like I'm very, very good at relationships. I'm absolutely, I'm exceptional. Um, but I got so much value from that. I just got it was just, for me, it was more like it helped me buy into what we were doing. Like, so if you listen to this podcast for the first time, the Awaken Man project was about getting guys to stop being lone wolves and deal with their problems stoically on their own, and actually that, some of these guys equally high performing, they've got relationships, but their default is to deal with stress, anxiety, struggle on their own. And it really opened my eyes to how powerful, and I actually believe, I can't say this word up first time over, efficacious is how much more, is that right? Is that, yeah? So it's the efficacy of group is so much, sometimes I believe, more efficacious than one to one, because
Yeah.
because I found this, like I found that because I came from body transformation, that's my background, and people needed that energy of a group of people in the morning versus that one-to-one personal training. And I do believe you get so much more collective wisdom from being in that group. And when I was listening to your book, what I found really interesting is Dr. Rosen, he really pushed you, didn't he? Like that's something that
Yeah.
I like, because people think, and this is what I loved about the book so much, is that you demonstrated so much of what's normally behind a curtain for people. They don't understand what goes on in coaching, the therapy or group. And I think what I loved is the first time that someone had really, really eloquently put together what goes on behind the curtain of a group. So can you tell me more about that? Because like that was it's only the entertaining part of the book. It's so, you do it so well. What was it like to go through that process of going from dealing with things on your own, going into the group, and
Yeah.
having someone who really pushed hard for you to work?
Yeah. I thought that I thought that real change happened in a one-on-one relationship, and I certainly know plenty of people who've had that experience, but once I got into group, it was a little bit like playing three-dimensional chess, cuz at once I am working on my relationship with the authority figure Dr. Rosen. So there's a relationship there, but then there's all these other people there. So at once I can work on being envious of other people and the attention that they get, or examining in real time my impulses to rescue people or save people or deflect. And to have people call me on my defense mechanisms, not even Dr. Rosen. And you're right, he did push me. And I'd had some therapy before where everything was real gentle, like, tell me about it, Christy. And I mean, I like to talk about myself. That's how I end up on podcasts. But I really, really wanted change, and I was open to being pushed. Like, now, let me just be clear. The first, Dr. Rosen calls his suggestions that he gives group members like myself, he calls them prescriptions, but they're not for pills. He doesn't really do many pills. The prescriptions were always like interpersonal, like every night, Christy, call Rory, a woman in my group, call her and tell her what you ate during the day. That sounds so simple and so banal if you don't have an eating disorder, but I had been secretive about my food my entire life. I had never, ever, ever once let anybody know what I actually ate during the day. And it just was all full of shame. I either ate too much or I didn't eat enough, or I ate the wrong things at the wrong time, at the wrong price. So the idea, the first time he said, okay, here's your prescription, call Rory every night, I jumped out of my chair like, no, 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 not that, not that, not that. It's just, in theory, it's like, it's what happened for me in group is like, it's testing. It was like a testing. Was I ready to change actually, or was it just theoretical? And the good news is I was in so much pain and isolation by the time I got there that I was willing to do the thing I most dreaded. Like, I'd rather tell you about my sex life at this point in my life. Back then, and when I started, I would have rather told you about my money or my sex than my food. That's how closely guarded I was. So slowly, I opened up and let go of that shame. And I let go of the shame by letting people know in the group how I eat. And from there, we worked on sleep, we worked on sex, and it takes a long time, A, to develop the trust. And secondly, I called Rory every night with my food for almost 4 years. That's a
Wow.
lot of food. That's a lot of breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks. And when I think about that, I think about like, I could have gone to a doctor who told me, take a pill, or, just figure it out, or don't eat this or don't eat that. But we were doing something that to me is much more interesting. It's like, let Rory hold out her hand to you and you grab her hand. And then now that I'm an elder in the group, I've been there over 20 years. Now when people come in and they have food secrets, I'm the person they call. So you get to play, you get to be, I think they call it in psychology, you are both a mirror and a door. Other people are, you see yourself, or you can see another portal into like freedom. One person's way of being might be complete liberation for me, but I've never seen it. But when you go to group, you can see it up close and personal week after week after week. And then you develop relationships with these people. and we're all committed to getting well together, it is incredibly powerful.
Oh wow. Yeah, I love what you said there about like yours was eating, your food. You had shame around food, and we all believe our shame is so special. Like, oh my god, like it's like I'm the same. I'll easily talk about my sex life, my relationship, but my money and my relationship with money. That's what. Oh my god, I have shame around that because that's my work on, and it's quite funny. We all like. I've never worked with a client who hasn't got something their thing, and it's like I love that expression is like your problems are like vampires; they disappear in the light, and I just like
Yes.
and it's like that. You could see that it was almost like, but it wasn't just a light; it was a freaking floodlight.
Yes, it was a flare. It was
Yeah,
absolutely, yes.
yeah, and but what was like really interesting because like the way that the group was constructed, you were encouraged to just be open and
Hmm.
like just really direct around feelings and people don't have that emotional safety or that space to practice that. And like, how did that help you outside of the group? Like, where did that start to show up in your career? Because I think a lot of men listening to this podcast and women, we have loads of women listeners as well, is that they don't make the connection between because I see therapy as like going like a -1 or a -2 to 0, but actually you end up like a -2 to like +5 because you're thriving.
Yeah.
And where did you start to see, or how quickly did you start to see that difference show up in your in your real life? In your professional life.
Yeah, I saw it very, very soon. When the stage I was in my career, I was in professional school and I was starting to interview for jobs. And my idea of the right job for me was really what probably people would call like a safety. Like I wanted to go to like a quiet mid-tier firm where I would be I kind of wanted to do I'll be a big fish in a little pond. And I'll never forget the day Dr. Rosen looked at me and he was like, "Do you understand that you are undervaluing yourself? You belong the top of the top." Like a really, really prestigious firm in Chicago wanted to hire me. And I was like, I had imposter syndrome. It was out of the question. My mind was like, the idea that I would go work for the best of the best, just my mind clanked shut. Like, no, it's a mistake. I'm not going there. And I remember Dr. Rosen working with me, and he was saying, first of all, it's going to be easier if you go work somewhere where everyone is as smart and driven and as ambitious as you. It will be easier for you. You won't have to carry anybody. That really stuck with me.
Wow.
And he said, why not just try it? Like, what's the harm in trying it? And from my perspective, I was a person who was terrified of failure. And I was also projecting failure, right? Like I was sure if I went to the best of the best, I would be too big for my britches. And other people there went to Harvard. And I had all these reasons to say, no, not me, to count myself out. And it was Dr. Rosen who was like, none of that. That's noise in your head. None of that is real. What's real, this firm has made you an offer and your job is to say yes. And he just made it real simple. There's so much noise in my head about how fancy my law school was, my gender, my age. And he was like, that is all BS. What the challenge is for you to step into who you really are, into your full potential. And I would have never, ever done that. Number one, if Dr. Rosen hadn't said it, and then I had 6 witnesses and they had all seen me. There's no hiding in a group,
No,
you're in a
no.
fishbowl.
Yeah.
And it's it's great to have it was great to have the authority figure, but I had 7 people cheering me on. That's
Wow.
incredible. That's incredible. With that kind of support, my self-image shifted and I started to believe, well, maybe I do belong there. And I went and worked there for 7 years. And I had a wonderful experience there that I would have never, ever, ever let myself take that bite without the support of the group. And PS, I was in the group the day I started, and then the day that I got my first trial, or when, big things would happen in my career, I'd be like, this is it. Now I'm really scared. And they'd be like, you got this. You got this. And that sounds so like it's not much, but it's everything. It's everything to have a group of people who have your back. They know you, they believe in you, and they've got you. Like they had my back the whole time, and they still do. That's why I was able to like take the leaps I would not have taken on my own.
Yeah, and there's something about people who and I know obviously that there's an investment to being part of these groups. Like, you paid for therapy, people paid to be
Yeah.
part of the Awaken but what I've always said, like, people, you pay attention to what you pay for, but the attention they pay is not just to themselves, it's to the other people in the group. They show
Yeah.
up for those people, and like when you said there, having those people witness you, witnessing, being witnessed, and and as a I don't know if it's any different for women as for men, but for a lot of the men that we've watched, is that the first time they've been witnessed, they just don't get, like, we share, we have a hot seat on a Thursday, and some guys just chime in to say, hey, I just want to share what's going on for me, just to be witnessed. And it's just
Yeah.
so powerful, and it's so simple. And
Yes.
yeah, it's like it feels sometimes like, oh my gosh, this is so simple, but a lot of men haven't ever had that. They haven't had that from their parents. They haven't had that from their partners, and then it's the first time they receive that kind of love. For men, it's the love being witnessed. It's
Yeah.
like a real deep loving feeling for guys. Like, oh my god, these guys actually really care about me. And so, in the book, you talk a lot about relationship, and the journey that you had going to that relationship. And can you tell me what specifically about the group do you feel that had the biggest, impact, or how did it really help you get to that point where you were ready to have a relationship?
My experience in group is that was the very first place I ever had any idea what intimacy was. I didn't experience it much growing up. My family was very distant. There was comfort and care there, but there wasn't like intimacy. And what I mean by intimacy is a relationship where I can bring my full self, meaning my goofiness, my rage, my terror, my bubbling joy, my enthusiasm, everything. I learned early on to keep a lid on my rage and my sadness. And so understandably, when I went out into the world, whole big parts of me, well, I already know I'm keeping all my food a secret. I can't ever let you know in a relationship that I feel angry. I really did have like a quiet internalized rule: never show you're angry, never really show you're afraid. But the anger was the big one. And so anytime, as you get closer and closer to someone, big feelings come up. Like eventually, if you're going to have a relationship with someone, somebody somewhere is going to get mad. And I would be out the door. I just kept all of my relationships at a deeply superficial level so that I would never have to express my own anger or feel it, and I would never have to deal with anyone else's. And if you sit in group therapy long enough, someone's going to piss you off. And what are you going to do about it? And then, so I learned in group how to bring my full self into a relationship, and also how to tolerate another person being their full self. That was incredibly terrifying to me. I just, there's a reason why I kept everything at a very business pleasant level. Once I built the skills in group, I understood I could say to someone I love you and I feel really angry. I thought before group, if you told someone that you were angry, it was the end of a relationship. That's how
Me
I
too.
understood anger.
Me too. Yeah,
And
me too.
so I was dealing with like less than half a deck when I'd go out into the world to have these relationships. And everything was so unfulfilling, but I didn't know that that was because I had only brought a tiny sliver of myself and just hoped I'd get the dividends of having brought my whole self. But I had to learn that in group, and it was so scary. I remember the first time someone was mad at me, and all I wanted to do was fix it. I just, please, please, please don't be mad. Like, I felt the energy in my whole body was like begging, make it stop, make it stop. I'll be better. I'll be better. I promise. I promise. Like I was just frantic. And Dr. Rosen would look at me and he would say, breathe, just breathe. There's nothing you have to do. And that was like one of the harder things. The hardest thing for me is not to do something, to just be still, be in discomfort, let the other person talk, let them have their feelings. That is a very hard thing to do.
Oh, wow. I think that speaks to so many men. Like this is so many men just want to fix in that
Yeah.
space. Obviously, I can only share my lived experience and with a lot of the clients I work with, and this was coming up for me actually when you were sharing. You were in a very prestigious professional environment, and I coached. I've actually my target market when I was coaching early in my career was barristers and lawyers in the UK, female, and you were talking about anger in the work, like in you and in the workplace, and I'm really curious to know, how did you deal and express and use anger in your professional career when you really managed to integrate it into the way that you, because I'm really curious about that, because I think that's something that I see with a lot of my clients. They don't know how to express anger in a way that A, allows them to express it, but
Yeah.
B, doesn't have a detrimental effect on their professional career. How did you do that?
Yeah, that's a very tricky thing. You can't go around raging at work. I don't think that is healthy or the appropriate venue for that. One of the things I would say is when I went to group, I had decades of anger stored in my body. So I had to do some rage work in group. First of all, to get the backlog out, to just like to right size my rage, because I would go to work before I was in group. I would go and be in professional situations, and I would just be aflame. I'd be aflame with rage, and I would kind of shut down internally, and I had no skills. So I would just bury it all, and then I'd have a resentment, and that's not healthy. Nothing was coming up and out. But also because I was sitting on decades of repressed anger, my reactions were often outsized, right? So I had to get some of it out that had been, third grade, high school, get all that out. So I'm not walking around with like extra kindling, you know what I'm saying? And then once I got into professional situations, one of the things I had to learn was step away, like go, like I was very lucky. I always had a situation where I could go and shut the door. Just breathe. Nothing's urgent. Very rarely were things urgent, right? Take a breath. Sometimes I call someone from group and just say, this is what's happening. Like, just talk me, like, help me make this rage appropriate for a workplace. And so that was very helpful. And the other thing was, oftentimes at work, the rage would come about because I had not set boundaries. I had not valued my time, my body, my health, my sleep, my eating. I just threw it all out the window because I wanted to look tough. I was in the law firm. I picked this big fancy law firm where we were supposed to be. I had the feeling I was supposed to pretend like I didn't have a body. I didn't have any needs. I would just open a vein and bleed for the clients, right? And what I learned in group that would help with the rage was I could set a boundary. I could say, I'm willing to work until 2 o'clock tonight or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to go home and I'm going to get a few hours of sleep, and I'll be back here at 6. Even if some people were pulling all nighters, because I knew what I needed, and that was plenty of work. Do you know what I'm saying? It gets easier to set boundaries, or it did for me. It got easier as I got more senior in my organization. I'd already proved myself. And I also understood I am more valuable to my workplace if I take care of myself. And work isn't going to do it for me. There's no organization in the world that cares more about how much sleep I get, whether I got a piece of fresh fruit, whether I had, had time to go to the dry cleaners. No, organizations aren't supposed to care about me. I'm supposed to care about me. So setting boundaries was very helpful. And then, sometimes, law is high conflict. I was a litigator. So we would get in situations where like the other side is screaming and accusing us of screaming and accusing my client of fraud. Those are very high tense moments. But because I'd done my work, right? I sat in group when someone was screaming at me, saying things that I don't believe are true. I could listen to opposing counsel. I could listen to a judge who was being unreasonable. I can listen and calm, like I could find the calm place inside of myself and think clearly enough to answer responsibly, which doesn't mean I'm not angry. I didn't even have to announce I was angry. But because I had done the rage work, I knew I could breathe through it. I could compose myself and say, I also knew I was never more than 4 days from a therapy session. So I was like, okay, I can grit it out. I'm having a terrible day at work on a Friday. Monday morning I get to go to group. So that's a good thing. So sticking close to when the support's going to come, that's super helpful. But some of those basics, like having boundaries, that saved me. I would not have stayed a lawyer if I couldn't have said, here's what I'm able to do, and here's what I'm not able to do. Take it or leave it. And no one, like I wasn't in a situation. Some of the tyranny in law is everyone thinks you have to go balls out all the time. And it's just not true. And once I got healthier, I began to see other people setting boundaries. And I realized some of the toxicity was internalized in me. And the organization wasn't nearly as toxic as I thought. I was just vibrating on a toxic level. So, of course, I saw it everywhere. Once I got healthier, I was like, oh, she went home and went to bed. Oh, he took time off to go to the doctor's office. So can I. And that's what I internalized. New messages.
Wow. Wow. That's so powerful, because I think that's something that I experienced with the lawyers that I worked with in the UK. They would sacrifice sleep, their eating, they would push themselves, especially women contending with
Mm-hmm.
men. Like I saw that quite a lot.
Yeah.
Like in the I don't know if it's the same in the US. Like like especially women that had children, they felt like they had to catch up, so they would play almost like they were running at a pace that was beyond sustainable.
Yeah.
But the boundaries piece, and do you know what's really interesting? I think is like no one actually kind of sits you down and goes, "Here's a fucking how you do boundaries." Like that was me. I was a guy. I didn't even know what a word was. The word was until someone said, "Ben, you have no boundaries," and I was like, "What the fuck does that mean?" Like what does that even mean as a man?
Yeah.
And like I just thought it was about being late, timekeeping, and I was terrible with timekeeping. I didn't know when to say, this is where this is your problem and it's becoming my problem.
Yeah.
I actually wrote a boundaries course for guys because, like, that's the best way I learn is to teach this stuff, and I still find that probably the most difficult part of my life and in relationship is boundaries. I am with the most
Yeah.
boundaried woman I think on the planet. It's
That's
just-
good.
yeah, it is, and it's like, and that has its struggles and challenges, and
Yeah.
but I love how you position that. It's like actually the self preservation of the boundaries, and how you linked it with rage and anger, because that was me. I was me. I was so angry inside, and
Yeah.
I on the outside I was trying to portray this a happy go lucky guy, but I
Mm-hmm.
was pissed off on the inside quite a lot. So yeah, I think
Yep.
this is why I resonate with so much of your story. So you talk about obviously you had 7 years in law in that law firm. What happened after? Like so, because I know that you now you run groups, right? Is that correct?
No, now I actually write full time,
Right. Okay.
which is great, and I still go to group run by Dr. Rosen, and I stayed in high, I guess high flying financial litigation law till I had my children. And this is like tale as old as time. There was like a very stark statistic that once women in these law firms, I don't know if that's how it is in the US, once you have your second baby, there's like, it's called the opt out and women leave. And I tried several different iterations of a legal career to try to harmonize it with my mental health and my children and all the things I wanted to do in my life. And I tried working for a judge. I tried working for the government. I tried a small firm. And at the end of the day, what I found is I just really outgrown it. Like I really wanted to be a writer, a working writer and an artist. And I have so much gratitude for everything I learned process wise and content wise as a lawyer. And I found a second calling was hiding under there. And it's an amazing thing. And it's another place where I would have never, ever, ever quit my legal job. But my group kept saying, "What are you doing? Why aren't you betting on yourself? Why are you?" I remember the day that I finally decided I was going to try writing full time. Instead of working, I was working for a federal agency as a lawyer, and this woman in my group who we don't interact very much. And she looked at me and she's like, "You know what? I think you're keeping this job so that you can always feel ashamed." And I was like, "I'm not ashamed of the job." And she was like, "Nope, there's something about it. I think this is a way for you to always be ashamed and to keep yourself small." And I was like, I was so busted. I was so busted. And I can't even fully explain it, but she was right. I was hiding in this job that was very easy. It was pretty boring. It was one of those jobs where if I ever told anybody what I did, never ever once in the 6 years I worked for this government agency did anyone ever ask me a follow-up question, because it's so boring. You would never want to know more about it. And I didn't want to bet on myself or be a full-time writer because I was scared. And also, I just thought, well, what am I going to do all day? And my group would say, "You're going to write." And I'd be like, "But I need a boss. I need emails." And I was scared of the lack of structure. I was really scared of the lack of, I mean, I had been in a job where I had to bill 6-minute increments since I was 30 years old. And now I quit working as a lawyer at 48. So that was a huge shift. And again, I leaned on my group and I haven't looked back. I mean, I suppose I could go back to law someday. I don't have a grudge against it, but it really gave me the scaffolding to explore this artist side of me that it's still really scary, but it's super fun. It does feel like my soul's calling for today.
Wow. We actually, have you heard about the concept of the second mountain?
No.
Okay, so we teach this to guys. This is kind of how guys, a lot of guys come to us. So they, in your 20s and 30s, you pursue something called hedonistic success. It's like the trappings of success. It's the career, the money, the status. A lot of it
Mm-hmm.
is about your identity. And then in the second half of your life, there is a shift. There's a point, and some people like there's an existential crisis, or it's a, and they like it's called their second mountain shows up. They're like, well, actually, I've been climbing the right ladder, but against the wrong wall, and it's where they
Oh,
turn and they want what's called eudaimonic pleasure, and it's a good soul. So they actually it's for me it was like I was in fitness and I loved it. It gave me lots of money. Everything. It was like I was a very very significant part of my community, and I was like
yeah.
actually that was a calling. And like I actually interviewed Gay Hendricks um, on Monday, and he talks about this big leap. The big leap. This idea of like your zone of excellence. You're truly excellent. You're bound by sometimes a wage and then it's that big leap into a something that's your zone of genius, which is,
Mm.
and I can hear that for you, like just because reading your book, and it was so phenomenal. It really like I've read so I'm a proper bookie, and then having that experience of reading your book, it is your zone of genius, right?
Thank you. No one's ever told me I had a zone of genius. This is amazing. I'll take it.
Yeah, yeah. He said it's exactly. Gay Hendricks said at the end of the call to me, he's like, "This is clearly a zone of genius," and I nearly collapsed. Like I
Yes.
nearly like fell over.
Yes,
I
yes.
was like, my hero just said that to me. I was like, oh my gosh. But it is it. I think that clearly incredible at that. What I've found just interesting listening is that your group helped you with that transition, and I think that
Yep.
that's like a big part of what people don't have, is that life is transitional, and like,
Hmm.
and so kind of like that is it. Was that one of the biggest transitions for you?
That was huge. That was huge, huge, huge. And what's so interesting is when I did a book tour for the book, it was during COVID, so it was all from my office. And every time I had an audience Q&A, there's always someone who asked, when are you going to quit? When are you going to be done? When are you going to graduate, essentially, from therapy, from group? And I was always like a little disappointed to get the question. I understand people are thinking you're just putting money in this Dr. Rosen's pocket, and is he exploiting you, or you just never get to leave. But from my perspective, like you just said, life is endless transition. During group, I became a lawyer, then I became a wife, then I became a mother, and then I became a writer, and then I let go of being a lawyer. It's like there's more stuff coming. There's My parents are elderly. At some point, I'm probably going to become a motherless child. I'm going to launch my children. Why would I not want to have scaffolding for all the things that are coming? If it has served me this well for this long, I don't care. I don't care that I could buy Dr. Rosen a boat. I have a whole huge life that is worth every penny. That being said, I do recognize the privilege and the money that it takes to go to group. I mean, I picked group initially because I couldn't afford, one-on-one therapy, or real therapy as I called it then. And it's a privilege to take 180 minutes a week to go to group. So I don't take that for granted, but I also feel like if I've set aside this time and money, I can't think of anything I'd rather do with either. It's not going to be easy. What's coming is not, I mean, they're all during the pandemic. I kept thinking, what would I do if I didn't have group? It was, we don't know what's coming personally or globally. So I really do feel like I wish that the way that people thought about therapy is that it's not just for a crisis or groups, whatever, that people sought support and community, not just during crisis. And then the minute they feel better, they're leaving. That doesn't make sense to me. That's not a model that I have chosen to follow, because I know whatever's coming, I want the support and the company and the community.
Yeah, a good friend of mine actually said to me once. He's like a great operations director, and he said, "Ben, the biggest problem with fitness is people value their health, but they also put a value on it, and your job is
Mm,
to change that value." And it's the same. What I'm hearing there is like people value their mental health, but they've also assigned a value to it, and their
yeah.
value is maybe going, like my dad. I was so excited that my dad was going to go to my psychotherapist, and I was like, yes, finally he's going to go to do some psychotherapy. And he went to one session. And he came out and he's like, yeah, I don't need to go back again. And it's just like,
Hmm.
I was like, oh my God. I've been there for like a year, and I had such a transformational experience. And it was the same for him with fitness. We went to my gym for a week, and he was like, yeah, I don't need to go now, I'm good. And I think, yeah,
1 week at the gym.
I know. It's like, yeah, I love him to bits, man. He just, that's his model of how he interacts with like therapy help, the helping professions. It's like it is a short-based prescription. And I think that another thing that I really do like about your story is that you're flying the flag for this is a long-term process. It's a commitment, and it's a real commitment, and it's a recommitment, and it's like I really love that.
Yeah, I think if someone is in enough pain, like me, I mean, it's not like I was virtuous and was like, oh, I'm going to really commit myself to self transformation. No, I was in pain. I was in such real, raw pain that I really was willing to do anything. And then once I got there and got connected, I mean, it's fun. And I'm not done. I'm not done transforming. So I'm just grateful. The other thing I always tell people about this kind of group therapy, it may not, I don't think it's for everybody. I don't really try to, I do not believe, I don't proselytize everyone should join a group. What I do believe to my bones is that I want everyone to know about it, because you don't know if your daughter or your spouse is hit the wall and isn't changing in one-on-one therapy. Here's another tool in the toolbox. I just want people to know there's a tool in the toolbox. They may have no interest in joining a group or doing any of the wacky things I did. That's fine, but let's all expand the toolbox, the mental health toolbox, because this really saved me. And I've watched it change men and women. I've watched lives literally transform. And I say before my eyes, and what I mean is for 4 years, for 7 years, I watched someone never get a second date, and now he's married and going to have a baby and is a contented, peaceful, purpose-filled person. When I met him, he was an angry young man who could barely sit still. And that's incredible. People should just know that exists.
Well, and specifically then, men in group. Why do you think it's so important for a man to join a group? From your lived experience, what specifically for, because like men.
Yeah, I from what I've observed, and I've been in co-ed groups the entire time. So there's the men that I'm with now, some of them I've been with for almost 15 years. And what I hear them saying and saying to each other, they're not even always talking to me, is they're saying, no one taught us how to do this. No one told me it was okay for me to say to a man, I love you. I need you. Can you help me? Though
Oh,
that's pretty basic, but what I'm hearing from them is that there's so much internalized homophobia and there's so much terror around vulnerability that it just stays at the level of like, hey bro, hey brah, whatever. So I think what happens in group is that you will be exposed for all your glory and all your gore. And it does happen in a safe place and you will be loved all the way through it. I don't know how else you get that experience. What I'm hearing from the men is that you don't really get that in a locker room. You definitely don't get that in work. There's so many places where a man has to wear a mask of toughness, of I have the answers. I will get the answers. I am not afraid. All that toughness, there's such an emotional toll for that. And group really dismantles that and it lets everybody slowly and in their own time take their mask down and be fully human. We're walking around with a mask on. It's not fully human. And there's an incredible cost to that for men. And I've seen it. And it's interesting too, because I always would say, oh, I want to see men be sensitive and blah, blah, blah. And I'm really available for that. And when the men in my group really get in their feelings, it's terrifying. There's something scary about it. I haven't seen that. Where do you see that? It's not modeled. It's not modeled. It's like being at the forefront of a revolution. It's like, ooh, it's awesome, it's sublime, and it's super foreign.
yeah. Yeah, it is. And I walked into that, and I actually I took a couple of buddies to a men's group, and it terrified them. It was like, what the fuck? It was like,
Yeah.
and it just so alien to so many men, and that's the thing about men's work. It's so repellent for so many men. And this is kind of
Mm,
why I do what I do. I try to reduce that stigma of men being
mm,
like, if some guys are listening to this podcast and they've never been in that situation where they do what you just talked about, that they're like, what the how the hell's that going to help me? How the hell's that going to,
right.
and I think that they can't make the connection between that's how you empty the bucket. That's how you empty the stress
Yes.
bucket. That's how you get to the place where you're not going to set yourself on fire when the smallest thing in your life. And I think that's
Yeah.
something that, that emotional, I almost say like emotional fitness. It's the ability to just,
Yeah.
yeah. And so many men haven't had that modeled, or they don't know where to actually go and do that work because it's not
Hmm.
signposted. So, um, if you've listened to the podcast today, Christie's book is amazing. I honestly, it is really, really, really great. I recommend listening to it. I listen to a lot of my books. It's available on Amazon as well. And you've got another book for women, for the women listening to this podcast as well, because there will be. You've just released another book. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well? Because it'd be lovely to hear about what you've just written.
Sure. And thank you for the kind words about my work. That's really a wonderful thing to hear. I hope I'm taking it in. My second book is called BFF, and it's about my struggles. Once I went to Dr. Rosen because I was lonely and isolated, and I really, really, I knew I wanted to have a family. And I'm like, I can't even go on a second date. What is going to happen to me? And I was terrified of men. So I got sort of straightened out. It took a long time. And once I got settled romantically, I sort of looked around and I was like, oh no, I had a lot of problems in my friendships. I had a hard time connecting to women and having long-term friends. And the story of BFF is how I worked another friend of mine. We both decided we were going to stop saying we're not good at friendship, and we were just going to get good at it. We were going to practice and excavate our past and become good friends to the women in our lives. And that's the story of BFF.
I think it's so appropriate for even the men listening in, because I think sometimes some of the guilt that I think men bring to the relationship is that because their partner hasn't got friends and hasn't
Yeah,
cultivated friendships, she's become codependent with the man. That fucks their relationship. It really doesn't do what that. So then you kind of had this like toxic
hmm,
codependency, and then guys become, overly, like, there's so many problems that happen in the men's lives because of that issue, and that the woman
totally.
doesn't, yeah, like they haven't gone and dealt with it. So I think that is a really, really profound book for guys. So if you're listening, it's Christmas is coming up. It's maybe suggestion, but ladies listening, like, if I think that's such an important thing. If you're a lady listening to this podcast, there's so many men that I hear, and they one of the struggles that they have is that you don't have friends or don't have a friendship group, or you can't make
Yeah.
friends, and they feel guilty. That's what I hear from the men's side. And like men from the women's side as well, is like that is such an important part for you both to be able to have your own. Like, I think it's like, is it Jill Gabrin, something like that? He said, like, let there be space in your togetherness. And like,
Yes.
like that for me was a really, really profound statement, because it's like so many like partnerships become so fused. And that's actually, I got married and divorced in a year, and that was one of the issues, one of
Yeah.
the many issues that I had. So yeah, definitely go and read that. I'll definitely check it out, because I think it'd be great for me to understand, and love your work, Christy, as well. So um, I'll put all the links to your, what would you like people to follow you and stuff like that if they've listened to the podcast?
Oh, sure. I'm a person who's on Instagram, and you can look under my name. It's Christy O Tate. My middle initial is O, so that's how that's in there. Love to have conversations about books and community and groups, really anything at all. So I would love to hear from readers or just people curious about any of the things we've talked about. I'm always up for a conversation.
Thank you so much. And thank you for writing the book. Thank you for coming and sharing today. I really enjoyed that conversation. It's been amazing and really insightful. And if you've listened in, please go and either follow Christy, go and buy the book. I'm quite evangelical about this book. It's one of my top 5 that I give clients. There's no BS here. It's like, it's so, so powerful. If you're thinking of joining a group, going to group therapy or a coaching group, it will help you more than understand the model and how to be in that model of support. So yeah, so, so great. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next podcast.